Ryan should support Claressa, in my opinion. I truly am. I won't lie. When her relative did an interview, I became a little agitated. Yes, I did consent to the interview since I'm messy. That's how messy I am. Do you sense me? I have no control over who I am. However, when Carissa's cousin Shalita appeared on my platform, I did feel a little terrible for her. I literally asked, why would you drag her? What are people saying, down? What if everything you defended was never loyalty at all? According to Tasha K, this was never about rumors, rather, it was about receipts that took weeks to verify quietly off camera, off timelines, and away from the noise. She claims that the truth didn't come all at once, rather, it came in bits and pieces, overlapping dates that didn't line up, the same voice notes sent to different women, the same excuses recycled, just delivered to new inboxes, and while Claressa's shield appeared confident, according to what was discovered, Papoose wasn't juggling one secret situation, instead, he was managing a system with 5 women, 5 roles, one for emotional support, one kept quiet, one from the past that never really ended, one recent, and one held as a future option. This wasn't chaos, it was structure, and Claressa, whether she realized it or not, was standing inside something that was never intended to protect her. When love turns out to be multitasking, the real question isn't who lied first, it's who stays once the truth is no longer deniable. However, on this Christmas with him, this very special Christmas with him, it appears that Claressa spent Christmas alone in the Louis Vuitton store racking. The moment that shattered everything didn't happen online, it happened quietly on Christmas. The day she thought was theirs was already booked. That's when the collapse began. Up about 30,000 in bills, this Christmas. Alright, Papoose was with his family. Tasha K opened this story with certainty rather than drama. She said, this isn't rumors. These are receipts. That distinction mattered because, in her opinion, this wasn't something she reacted to overnight. Rather, it was something she sat with, verified quietly, cross-checked without making any noise, confirmed names, compared timelines, and tested patterns, and when everything finally came into focus, it wasn't just a messy relationship. It was something much more calculated, according to Tasha, who said that several people attempted to alert Claressa Shields long before the public ever realized something was wrong, not in an aggressive or public manner, but through quiet conversations, subtle nudges, and questions that didn't quite add up. However, Tasha claimed that Claressa was in love mode, which has a way of turning warning signs into background noise. She trusted the loyalty she was receiving, the assurance and the version of the narrative that made her feel selected, but she was unaware, at least not yet, that loyalty was being broken across multiple locations rather than just one. The first bomb, 5, not 1. Tasha K's first significant allegation completely altered the situation. It wasn't about one extra woman, one error, or even one covert relationship. Based on what she discovered, Papoose was concurrently involved with 5 different women, each of whom occupied a different lane in his life. A long-term past situation that never really ended, history that lingered, comfort that remained accessible, a recent hookup that was short-lived and impulsive, but still active, and one more woman described as a future option, someone kept close enough to remain available but distant enough to remain undefined. Tasha K did not frame this as chaos. The way the details overlapped, Tasha described timelines that collided rather than flowed smoothly, travel dates that didn't make sense when compared side by side, was what made the story more difficult to discount than flashy screenshots or leaked images. She framed it as design. He wasn't in a relationship. She said he was running a system, and in that system, every woman served a different purpose. The voice notes that were sent to different women had the same tone, the same phrasing, and the same excuses, work obligations, family responsibilities, scheduling conflicts, but the recipients kept changing. The more these patterns appeared, the more obvious one thing became. the loyalty Claressa was publicly defending appeared to be quite different behind closed doors. She exuded confidence, strength, and an air of indifference, but in private, according to Tasha K, it wasn't that easy. She claimed that Claressa had already seen some messages, not all of them, but enough to raise concerns, and that rather than confronting the situation head-on, she looked for context, explanations, and alternate meanings, trying to persuade herself that what she was seeing didn't apply to her, that she was different, and that her place in his life was secure. This led the story. I wanted to ask out loud if Claressa was the main woman, or just the most noticeable one. I felt bad for her when she blew a bag worth $30,000 and then had to take it to Papoose and pretend that Papoose gave it to her. I don't know why you did that, but you didn't have to. The moment mattered because, to Tasha K, it wasn't about a bag, it was about behavior. The hesitation, the slip, the performance layered over reality. Try to hide. According to Tasha K, the real turning point didn't occur during an argument, online, or in public at all. It happened on Christmas, and she claimed that Claressa spent that day alone. She was given the straightforward explanation that it was due to family obligations, but the reality, according to the exposé, was much more painful. Papoose wasn't unavailable, he wasn't alone. He was with Remy Ma, and Tasha K put it bluntly, and that distinction changed everything. The day Claressa thought was our vacation was already booked. What made it worse wasn't just the lie, but the framing. She was told that family comes first, but she was never really included in the family circle. While this was happening in private, the public narrative told a different story. Claressa continued to post couple content, throwbacks, and encouraging captions. From the outside, it looked unified, stable, and secure. However, Tasha K claims that behind the scenes, the energy didn't match. He was emotionally aloof, future plans were ambiguous, decisions were made without her input, and she was producing girlfriend content while he was developing an exit strategy. When the title states that Claressa collapses, Tasha K clarified that this wasn't physical. There were no dramatic moments captured on camera, no public tears, no breakdown video, and this was quieter than that. It was the collapse of trust. The collapse of Tasha K made it very clear that she wasn't attempting to turn Claressa into a villain, attacking her strength, or doubting her value. Rather, she was exposing a system, a pattern where powerful men juggle emotional access across multiple women while presenting a single controlled image to the public. Claressa isn't weak. She said she was misinformed as the story spread. Papoose didn't erupt. There were no long denials, no in-depth breakdowns, just brief statements and minimal engagement. And to Tasha K, that silence wasn't accidental. When receipts are real, she said, silence is strategy. If 5 women were involved, if Christmas was a lie, and if the system was real, then the story no longer belongs to the public. By the time the story reached this point, it was impossible to ignore the fact that nothing
was being denied, clarified, or explained, and in situations like this, silence doesn't mean confusion, it means calculation. Tasha K claims that what transpired next was not emotional chaos but rather strategic restraint. As the public debated timelines, receipts, and Christmas lies, the main character at the center of the storm did something very purposeful. He slowed everything down. There were no lengthy statements, no interviews, no emotional appeals, just enough presence to remind people he was watching, and just enough distance to avoid saying anything that could be contested later. Tasha K interpreted this as experience rather than fear, because when someone manages multiple narratives at once, they already know that talking too much is the most dangerous thing they can do. The system becomes visible. This was no longer about the existence of multiple women. It had to do with how long the system had been in place. According to Tasha K, each woman lived in a different emotional lane, and none of them were supposed to collide. Overlapping dates weren't coincidental, they were planned risks. Travel timing wasn't random, it was purposefully staggered. The structure only functioned as long as each woman felt she had a distinct role. Claressa's role, according to the narrative, wasn't secrecy, it was visibility. Tasha K claimed that when love turned into defense, Claressa didn't just trust blindly but actively defended the trust. When questions arose, she contextualized them. When inconsistencies appeared, she reframed them. When timelines clashed, she told herself there was a reasonable explanation. She was the loudest presence and the most publicly defended, and her strength and confidence made the entire situation appear stable from the outside, and that mattered because as long as she appeared solid, the system stayed protected. Explanation that she simply hadn't noticed yet. This wasn't weakness, rather, it was emotional investment colliding with cognitive dissonance because acknowledging the truth would require acknowledging something much more painful, that loyalty was never exclusive, and everything else begins to fall apart once that realization starts. The moment that changed the power. Halfway through the narrative, Tasha K returned to a seemingly insignificant moment, a remark, a pause, a slip. But little moments do LV store on Christmas because she was unable to attend the family get-togethers despite claiming to be family. She also claims that Papoose is divorcing Remy, even though I'm not sure if the divorce is proceeding. This wasn't gossip, rather, it was pressure because if the divorce wasn't progressing, then nothing was truly being resolved, no clean starts, no clean exits, just people suspended in emotional limbo. Why did the divorce matter? According to Tasha K, the divorce narrative was about leverage rather than legality. As long as things remained unresolved, power remained exactly where it was. No finality meant no accountability, no paperwork meant no public closure, and for someone with multiple emotional lanes, an unresolved status was advantageous because it kept everyone guessing, kept options open, kept stories flexible, and kept reactions delayed. Uncertainty, public confidence, and private pressure left Claressa bearing the emotional burden of a situation she didn't fully control. On the outside, Claressa still seemed composed, with no breakdown posts, accusations, or emotional outbursts, but Tasha K claimed the internal pressure was growing. She described a woman torn between what she felt and what she had already publicly defended because once you defend a narrative loudly, walking it back becomes humiliating, and humiliation more than heartbreak is what keeps the cost of being the strong one. Tasha K pointed out a pattern that she said frequently occurs in situations like this: the strongest woman in the room is expected to quietly absorb the most damage. No one rushes to protect her. No one assumes she's confused. No one checks on her certainty. They assume she's fine. However, strength doesn't stop realization from hurting, it just delays when you allow it to show. Silence as a weapon. As the allegations spread, the when receipts are real, silence becomes strategy because every word spoken can be examined, every sentence can be replayed, and silence leaves nothing to dissect. The story turns inward. Not to the women, not to the rumors, but to the choice. According to Claressa Shields, the lack of response became louder than any denial could have been. No thorough rebuttal, no timeline corrections, no evidence presented to counter the claims. This wasn't an accident. This story is no longer about exposure, it's about timing, about when silence ends, about when decisions are made, and about when strength stops being performative and becomes self-protective. One path required her to walk away publicly, decisively, and permanently, the other required her to stay quietly, cautiously, within a structure she now understood. Neither path was easy, and neither could be postponed forever, because once the system is seen, it can never be unseen. According to the narrative Tasha K laid out, this is the stage where everything slows down on the surface and accelerates underneath. No new statements, no dramatic confrontations, no public outbursts. The most dangerous moment hasn't yet occurred because the real collapse isn't loud, it's the second she decides whether to protect the image or protect herself. By this point, the story is no longer moving forward, it's tightening because once a system is exposed, it doesn't collapse immediately. Acknowledgement, simply waiting, and waiting in such circumstances is never neutral. There is a calm period that follows realization, when the mind ceases looking for answers. This is the point at which you stop asking yourself, is this true? You want to know how long this has been the case. This is where Claressa Shields found herself, according to Tasha K. She stopped being puzzled, stopped looking for context, stopped attempting to decipher messages, and just sat with the weight of what had already been discovered. According to Tasha K, Clarissa's collapse wasn't dramatic because it didn't need to be. Instead, it was internal, a recalculation, a sudden realization that strength had been compromised. The cost of seeing clearly is that it doesn't feel empowering at first. Rather, it feels humiliating because it forces you to replay every moment you defended someone who didn't deserve it, every time you dismissed a warning, and every instance where you became the shield for a narrative that was subtly hurting you. Weaponized against her, not by force but by assumption. She was strong, so she would persevere. She was self-assured, so she wouldn't question. She was public, so she would protect the image until the image stopped protecting her. The system's last move: wait it out. By part 3, the silence had taken on a new meaning. It wasn't just avoidance, it was patience because, according to Tasha K., systems like this don't rush endings. They rely on the assumption that public attention will wane, that outrage will subside, and that the person bearing the emotional burden will ultimately take the easiest route. Silence isn't absence, rather, it's pressure without fingerprints. The longer you remain silent, the more responsibility shifts from the person who caused the damage to the person who is expected to respond to it gracefully. Why does public strength become a trap? There's a cruel paradox in being visibly strong. People stop asking how you're doing. Tasha K. cautioned against this assumption, arguing that silence doesn't always mean acceptance. Sometimes it means calculation. Sometimes it means survival, the internal question no one can answer for. They stop thinking that you might be unsure. They assume you've already processed everything. And when you don't react right away, they interpret it as confirmation. Confirmation that nothing serious happened. Confirmation that the allegations were exaggerated. At this point, the story shifted from being about 5 women, Christmas, and timelines to a single harsh question: if I walk away now, who do I become? Walking away not only ends a relationship, but it also rewrites your public identity and forces you to acknowledge that something you stood for was never what you thought it was. Staying, on the other hand, requires a different sacrifice. Tasha K's final position: Tasha K made it clear that she wasn't pressuring Claressa to make a particular decision, that she wasn't calling for confrontation, that she wasn't demanding public statements, and that she wasn't framing this as a spectacle. It requires compartmentalization, silence, and the capacity to live with knowledge you can't unsee. Neither option offers peace, they just offer different kinds of loss. According to Tasha K., Claressa's strength was never the problem. Rather, the problem was that her strength made the system comfortable. She framed it as a reckoning. This isn't about exposing a woman, rather, it's about exposing a pattern where power is maintained through ambiguity, where accountability is delayed through silence, and where women are expected to absorb emotional fallout quietly, especially when they are capable, accomplished, and outwardly resilient. Protecting anyone, there comes a point at which silence ceases to be strategic, ceases to protect reputations, ceases to preserve options, and instead begins to permanently erode trust. According to Tasha K., this point is coming because once the public is aware of the system, they stop waiting for confirmation and instead start observing behavior, and unlike statements, behavior cannot be changed. Who shows up? Who avoids clarity? Who keeps options open instead of closing chapters? Those details tell a story on their own. The real collapse. By the end of part 3, the word collapse has taken on its full meaning. It was never about tears, headlines, or public humiliation. Rather, it was about the collapse of illusion, the illusion that loyalty was reciprocal, the illusion that visibility meant priority, and the illusion that silence meant safety. Tasha K framed this as the most dangerous collapse of all because it forces action. Once you see the structure, you can no longer stand inside it comfortably. This story doesn't really end with exposure, rather, it ends with a decision that Claressa Shields will make in private long before the public ever sees it. Whether she chooses confrontation or distance, whether she chooses silence or clarity, whether she chooses to preserve the image or preserve herself, and that's the part that no one can script because the real collapse isn't what the internet sees but rather the moment she decides whether to leave the chaos or stay there, fully aware of what it is. This is the point at which the story ceases to be entertaining and becomes a decision with consequences because, once the noise subsides, the clips stop circulating, and the comments slow down, one truth remains sitting in the middle of all of it: nothing that was exposed can be unseen. Based on what has been presented, this was never about a single lie, rather, it was about a structure that thrived on silence, overlap, and emotional convenience. When a structure like that cracks, it doesn't collapse loudly, instead, it waits. Claressa Shields now stands in a moment most the real damage is not heartbreak realization, which doesn't scream but suffocates. If 5 women were real, if Christmas was never hers, or if loyalty was just multitasking with better timing, then the question isn't what happened, but what happens next. Silence from one side is not peace, it's positioning. It's not a public breakdown, not a viral rant, but a private reckoning that makes you replay every defense, every excuse you made for someone else. It's not a tale of villains and victims, rather, it's about power, access, and who bears the emotional cost when the truth comes to light too late. The most dangerous part isn't what was said but what hasn't been denied. Now it's up to you. Do you think this was a system or a coincidence? Was Claressa the main woman or just the loudest one? How long can silence truly endure when the receipts are real? Share your thoughts in the comments section before it vanishes into the timeline. Keep in mind that the real collapse never occurs in public, rather, it occurs when someone chooses to protect themselves or their reputation.